Welcome to Wildlife for Sleep, a place where ancient oceans breathe slowly, where shadows drift beneath the waves, and where stories are told, not to awaken the mind, but to gently quiet it if these facts help you relax or slowly drift into sleep. Please like the video, subscribe to Wildlife for Sleep, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support helps this channel continue creating peaceful, slow science-inspired sleep documentaries. Now settle into a comfortable position, let your breathing soften, and allow the surface world to fade away. Tonight we descend into the deepest waters of the sea, long before the name Scylla was spoken, long before it was whispered among sailors or carved into memory by fear. The sea existed as something vast and undefined, a moving boundary that separated the known world from everything beyond it. To ancient people, water was not empty space. It was presence. It shifted. It listened. It responded. And to step onto it was to accept that control would be partial at best. Every voyage began with uncertainty and ended only when land returned beneath the feet. Storms arrived without warning. Calm could turn treacherous in moments, and the horizon promised nothing but distance. In such a world, danger did not feel accidental. It felt intentional, as though the sea itself decided when to give passage and when to refuse it. In those early centuries, before charts, before measured depths, before the language of science, humans understood the ocean through experience rather than explanation. Waves were not merely waves. They were actions. Currents were not patterns. They were forces with direction and will. When ships vanished, it was not assumed to be chance. Something had happened. Something had taken them. And the need to understand that taking, to give it form, to give it a name, became essential for survival of the mind, if not the body, because fear without shape is unbearable. But fear with a face can be prepared for, respected, endured. The earliest sailors of the Mediterranean traveled close to shore, not because it was faster, but because it was familiar. Cliffs offered landmarks. Islands provided shelter. The open sea beyond was an emptiness that swallowed sound and certainty. Nights were long, stars shifted slowly, and without fixed reference, direction itself could dissolve. In these moments, when oars dipped rhythmically into black water, when wind fell silent, and the hull creaked as though breathing, imagination filled the space. That sight could not. Every sound carried meaning. Every shadow hinted at presence, and the sea became crowded with unseen things. This was the psychological ocean in which Scylla would one day emerge, not born suddenly, not invented deliberately, but formed gradually, layer by layer, through repeated encounters with danger that felt the same, even when its cause could not be identified. Sailors noticed patterns long before they named them. Certain waters behaved differently. Some passages tightened the chest, narrowed attention, forced hands to grip wood more tightly. There were places where the sea felt constrained, where land pressed inward, where escape routes vanished, and mistakes carried immediate consequence. These places were remembered, spoken about quietly, avoided when possible, and respected always. Before Scylla had a body, she was a feeling, a tightening in the stomach as ships approached certain rocks, a silence that fell too suddenly, a shift in wind that arrived without reason, the sound of waves striking stone in a way that echoed back distorted, elongated, almost voice-like. Crews spoke of these moments afterward, trying to describe what they felt, not what they saw, because often nothing had been seen at all, only loss, only absence, only the sudden reduction of voices on deck, and the realization that something irreversible had occurred. Human memory does not preserve randomness well. It seeks cause, intention, meaning, and so stories began to form, not as entertainment, but as tools. Warnings passed from crew to crew, from harbor to harbor, about a place where ships must be careful, where steering too wide invited disaster, where steering too close demanded payment. These warnings accumulated, merged, and over generations, crystallized into a presence that was more than the sum of its parts. The sea in that place did not merely behave dangerously. It was dangerous, actively, consistently, and therefore it could be addressed. Naming danger is an act of power, even when that power is limited. To name something is to acknowledge it, to accept its permanence, and to learn how to move in relation to it. Scylla's earliest form was not monstrous, not yet. It was simply the idea that a specific place in the sea could not be passed without loss, that no skill, no strength, no courage could guarantee safety there. And this realization was unsettling, because it meant humans were not the final authority, even within their own journeys. In ancient thought, the world was not governed by impersonal laws. It was shaped by relationships, gods, spirits, guardians, forces that could be negotiated with, respected, offended, or appeased. When sailors spoke of the sea, they spoke as though it listened. When they poured offerings into the water, it was not symbolic, it was practical, an attempt to maintain balance with something greater. And in this worldview, a dangerous place was not merely geography, it was character. The place that would later be associated with Scylla demanded character to match its threat, a being that did not roam. Because the danger itself did not roam, it remained constant, waiting. And this constancy was key. Storms came and went, predators hunted and moved on. But the danger of this narrow sea remained unchanged, generation after generation. Ships approached it with the same tension, the same hesitation, the same quiet recognition that some outcomes were beyond control. Before Scylla was imagined as a creature, she existed as inevitability. The idea that passing through certain waters required acceptance of loss before it occurred. Sailors learned to count their crews before and after, not because they expected death, but because they understood possibility. This mindset shaped the earliest myths, where monsters were not challenges to be overcome, but thresholds to be crossed. And Scylla would become the embodiment of that threshold. It is important to understand that Scylla did not begin as a villain. She was not hated. She was not cursed. She was respected, feared, and accepted. Ancient sailors did not ask how to defeat her. They asked how to survive her. This distinction reveals much about the mindset of the time. Survival was not about victory. It was about continuity, returning home, even if changed, even if diminished. As stories passed from mouth to mouth, details accumulated, not randomly, but guided by emotional truth. The fear associated with the place demanded a form that felt appropriately threatening, something that could strike quickly, without warning, and leave no time for response. Because that was how loss occurred there, sudden, irreversible, unexplained. Thus, Scylla would later be imagined not as a single mouth, but many, not as a charging beast, but a waiting one, not as a conquerable enemy, but as a permanent presence. But all of that came later. In the beginning, before the monster, before the myth, before the name, there was only the sea tightening, narrowing, behaving in ways that punished misjudgment without malice, and humans, fragile by comparison, learning slowly, painfully, that not every path could be made safe, or that not every danger could be eliminated, and that some passages demanded sacrifice simply to continue forward. This realization settled deeply into the collective consciousness of those who lived by the water, shaping how they understood fate, choice, and responsibility. It taught them that survival was sometimes not about avoiding danger, but choosing which danger to face and accepting its cost. This lesson would later be spoken through the names Scylla and Charybdis. But long before those names existed, the lesson was already there, written into broken hulls, missing voices, and the silence that followed. Thus, before Scylla became a creature with teeth and form, she was a truth, an unspoken understanding shared by those who crossed the sea, that certain places demand humility, that some losses cannot be prevented, only anticipated, and that moving forward often means leaving something behind, unseen, unacknowledged by the sea itself, but forever remembered by those who survived. And it was from this quiet, enduring, collective awareness that the name Scylla would finally emerge, not as invention, but as recognition, the moment when fear, memory, and meaning aligned, and the sea's indifference was given a face, so it could be spoken of, warned against, and passed on, generation after generation. In the long silence between wave, the place where Scylla would one day be said to dwell was not chosen by chance. Long before it carried stories, long before it carried names, carried tension, the sea narrowed there, not abruptly, but enough that sailors felt it in their bodies before they could describe it with words. The horizon tightened, the freedom of open water diminished, and movement became constrained. Here, land pressed inward from both sides, cliffs rose sharply, and the sea was forced to move in unfamiliar ways. Currents met head-on. Winds twisted unpredictably, and the water never seemed entirely still. To ancient sailors, this narrowing felt unnatural. The sea was meant to be wide, forgiving in its vastness, allowing mistakes to dissipate into open space. But here, space itself felt limited. Every decision carried weight. Every adjustment of the rudder mattered. Ships entering this passage slowed instinctively. Crews grew quiet, not because danger was visible, but because something about the place demanded attention. The sea here did not invite passage, it tolerated it. Sound behaved differently in this narrow sea. Waves striking stone echoed back distorted, elongated, sometimes arriving from unexpected directions. Wind passing through caves carved into the cliffs produced low, hollow tones that rolled across the water at night. These sounds unsettled sailors, not because they were loud, but because they felt intentional, as though the sea itself was communicating in a language just beyond understanding. Many later accounts of voices, growls, or cries can be traced to these echoes, amplified by fear, darkness, and exhaustion. Currents beneath the surface added to the unease. Water moved laterally as much as forward, pulling ships toward rock faces with quiet persistence. Oars fought resistance that could not be seen. Steering required constant correction, and fatigue accumulated quickly. Sailors learned that strength alone was insufficient here. Attention mattered more. Timing mattered more. Restraint mattered more. Yet even perfect execution could not guarantee safety, because some forces acted regardless of skill. It was this unpredictability, this combination of constraint and inevitability, that separated the narrow sea from other dangerous waters. Storms could be waited out. Predators could be avoided. But this place could not be bypassed. It sat directly along essential trade routes, forcing passage, forcing encounter, and forcing sailors to confront the reality that some dangers are unavoidable, not because of failure, but because of geography itself. Over time, the narrow sea developed a reputation. Ships that vanished here were remembered. Crews lost here were spoken of long after other tragedies faded, because their loss felt different, not sudden like a storm, not violent like an attack, but precise, selective, as though something had reached up and taken only what it required, leaving the rest to continue, diminished, shaken, alive. This selectivity disturbed sailors deeply. A storm might destroy an entire ship, but here loss was partial, controlled, measured. A few voices gone, a few spaces empty on the deck, and the haunting realization that survival had been allowed, not earned. Such experiences demanded explanation. Randomness felt insufficient. Chance felt inadequate. The human mind searched for intention, for pattern, for agency. Thus, the narrow sea began to feel occupied, not crowded, but inhabited. Something lived here, not necessarily as a creature, but as a presence, a guardian of the passage, a force that claimed a toll not in gold, but in lives. This idea did not arise suddenly. It accumulated slowly, each incident reinforcing the last, until the place itself felt alive with expectation. Sailors adjusted their behavior accordingly. Offerings were made before entering the passage, prayers whispered. Oars dipped into the water with deliberate care. Captains chose which crew members stood watch, which rested. Sometimes even which ships attempted the crossing. Older sailors spoke quietly of steering just close enough, but not too close, of accepting that something might be lost, but ensuring that not everything would be taken. This language of acceptance is crucial. The narrow sea taught sailors that survival here was not about avoidance, but balance. Drift too far from one side, and the sea opened into chaos. Drift too far toward the other, and the rocks reached up. The passage demanded precision, but offered no guarantee. It was a negotiation without words, where the terms were never fully known. As generations passed, the narrow sea became more than a physical location. It became a concept, a test, a reminder that the world contains places where control dissolves, where human intention meets natural indifference, and where outcomes are shaped by forces that do not recognize fairness. This understanding shaped the stories told about the passage, stories that emphasized caution, humility, and acceptance rather than conquest. It is within this emotional and experiential landscape that Scylla would later be imagined, not as an intruder, but as the voice of the place itself. The narrow sea needed a face, something that embodied its selective danger, its proximity, its permanence, and Scylla fit that need precisely. A being that did not roam, because the danger did not roam. A being that waited, because the danger waited. A being that struck quickly, because loss occurred quickly here. Before she had heads, before she had teeth, before she had form, Scylla was the feeling sailors carried in their chests as they entered the passage, the tightening of breath, the quiet counting of crew, the awareness that not everyone who entered would leave unchanged. The narrow sea taught this lesson repeatedly, patiently, without explanation, until humans responded by giving its story. Even the daylight offered little comfort here. Sunlight revealed the cliffs, but not the dangers beneath the surface. Rocks lurked just below visibility. Waves broke unevenly, hiding their true force, and sudden gusts of wind funneled between landmasses could shift a ship's course in moments. Night magnified these dangers. Stars reflected off dark water, obscuring depth, while echoes from caves intensified, creating the illusion of movement where none existed, or hiding real movement until was too late. The narrow sea did not announce itself as deadly. It allowed approach, it allowed entry, and only then revealed its nature. This delayed revelation deepened its psychological impact. Sailors were not frightened away. They were drawn in, committed, and only afterward confronted with consequence. This pattern reinforced the idea that the passage tested judgment, not courage, awareness, not strength. As trade increased, as more ships passed through, the stories multiplied, details differed, but the core remained the same. Something in the narrow sea demanded payment, sometimes small, sometimes devastating, but never absent entirely, and this consistency gave the danger identity. Reliability is what transforms fear into belief. By the time poets and storytellers began shaping these experiences into myth, the narrow sea was already alive in collective memory. Scylla did not invent its danger. She inherited it. She became the narrative vessel through which centuries of maritime experience could be communicated quickly, effectively, and emotionally. A single name that carried the weight of countless lost voices. Thus, the narrow sea and Scylla became inseparable. One could not be spoken of without the other. The place explained the monster, and the monster explained the place. Together they formed a warning, not to stay away, but to proceed with understanding that some paths forward require sacrifice, and that survival often means accepting loss without bitterness. Because the sea does not care how loudly humans protest. And so, long before heroes, long before epic poems, long before gods intervened, the narrow sea stood as it always had, constrained, restless, indifferent, shaping human behavior through experience rather than instruction, teaching the lesson that would echo through myth, philosophy, and memory, that the world contains passages where danger cannot be removed, only respected, and that from such places beings like Scylla are born, not from imagination alone, but from lived reality. Scylla did not emerge into human imagination as a complete creature. She did not arrive with a fixed outline or a single agreed-upon form. Instead, her shape assembled itself slowly, drawn from fragments of fear, glimpses caught in poor light, sounds misheard, moments misunderstood, and memories reshaped by survival. The ancient world did not demand anatomical accuracy. It demanded emotional truth. And Scylla's form became whatever best expressed the terror sailors felt when passing too close to the rocks of the narrow sea. Fear rarely produces a single image. It multiplies, it fractures, it repeats. And so Scylla was imagined not with one mouth, but many, not with one point of attack, but several, because that was how danger felt in that place. Loss did not arrive from a single direction. It came suddenly, from below, from the side, from places unseen. A sailor could be standing safely one moment, and gone the next, taken so quickly that the mind struggled to follow, and so Scylla's body became reflection of this experience, multiple reaching forms, independent, unpredictable, yet coordinated by something unseen. The upper part of Scylla was often described as womanlike, not because sailors saw a woman, but because familiarity made the horror sharper. A face that hinted at humanity made the transformation more disturbing. It suggested loss, corruption, something once recognizable now made wrong. This blending of the known and the monstrous is common in ancient myth because it mirrors how fear operates. The most frightening things are rarely entirely alien. They are distortions of what we already understand. Below this familiar upper form, Scylla transformed into something impossible, long necks extended outward, sometimes 6, sometimes more, each ending in a snapping head, often described as dog-like, because dogs were known close, aggressive when provoked, their teeth familiar, their jaws powerful. Multiplying these heads intensified the fear. A single bite might be survived. Many could not, and sailors knew this truth well. One mistake might be corrected. Several at once could not. These heads did not move in unison. They acted independently, because danger in the narrow sea did not arrive predictably. One wave might be harmless, the next devastating. One moment calm, the next fatal. Scylla's many mouths embodied this randomness, each strike separate, each loss discrete, reinforcing the idea that survival there was not a matter of confronting one threat, but managing many at once, under pressure, with limited time. Scylla was not imagined as fast, not as a charging predator. Speed implies pursuit, and pursuit implies escape. But the danger she represented offered no such possibility. She was stationary, rooted, waiting like the rocks themselves. And this waiting was central to her terror. Sailors could prepare for storms. They could see predators approaching. But Scylla did not announce herself. She allowed approach, allowed commitment, and only then revealed consequence. Her cave, often mentioned in later descriptions, was not simply a dwelling. It was an extension of the rock face itself, dark, hollow, echoing, a place where sound entered but did not leave unchained. Sailors passing near these caves reported strange acoustics. Voices carried, returned altered, sometimes sounding like cries, sometimes like growls. The imagination filled in the rest, and Scylla's lair became a place where sound itself was untrustworthy, reinforcing the sense that perception could not be relied upon. Importantly, Scylla was rarely described as emerging fully into view. She was seen in parts, a head here, a movement there, shadows against stone, because that is how danger was experienced, partially, incompletely. No one stood and observed Scylla calmly. Those who came too close were taken. Those who survived saw only fragments, and those fragments became the building blocks of her image. This fragmented perception explains why descriptions of Scylla vary across sources. Some emphasize her upper body, others her lower. Some describe her as monstrous throughout, others as partially beautiful. These inconsistencies are not flaws. They are evidence of authenticity, fear remembered differently by different minds, shaped by darkness, exhaustion, and trauma. Yet all versions agree on the essential truth: Scylla takes quickly, without warning, and without negotiation. Unlike many monsters of myth, Scylla did not roar or threaten. Sound belongs to warning, and Scylla offered none. Silence preceded her strikes. The sea did not change color. The wind did not shift. Loss occurred in calm conditions as often as in rough ones. This absence of warning was perhaps her most frightening trait, because it denied sailors the illusion of control. Her teeth were emphasized in stories, not because of gore, but because teeth are final, they close, they end possibility. The image of sailors lifted from decks and crushed instantly conveyed the speed with which fate could arrive in the narrow sea. There was no time for heroism, no opportunity for farewell, only sudden absence, and the echo of voices cut short. Scylla's multiplicity also reflected collective loss. She did not take one sailor and retreat. She took several, because that is how the sea often behaved there. A single wave might knock one person overboard, but currents and rocks worked together, claiming more than one at a time. The mind translated this experience into a creature that could strike multiple targets simultaneously, making sense of chaos through narrative structure. As stories evolved, Scylla's form became more elaborate. Poets added detail, artists added shape, but the emotional core remained unchanged. She was not meant to be visualized precisely. She was meant to be felt. A tightening of the chest, a heightened awareness of proximity, the instinct to steer carefully, to count crew, to accept loss before it occurred. It is telling that Scylla was never given wings, never allowed to swim freely, never portrayed crossing great distances. Her danger was localized, specific, bound. Just like the hazards that inspired her, she was not a roaming terror of the deep. She was a fixed threshold, a guardian of passage. And her form reflected this role perfectly, reaching outward, but never leaving her place. In shaping Scylla's image, ancient storytellers were not attempting realism. They were encoding experience. Every exaggerated feature served a purpose. Many heads for many dangers, waiting posture for inevitable encounter, partial humanity for tragic distortion, immobility for permanence. Scylla's body was a map of fear drawn not on parchment, but in story. This process reveals something profound about how humans interact with danger. We give it shape not to glorify it, but to remember it, to warn others, to prepare the mind for what the body may face. Scylla's form taught sailors where not to linger, how not to approach, and why humility mattered more than bravery in certain waters. By the time Scylla appeared fully formed in myth, her shape had already done its work. Generations of sailors had learned caution through story, had adjusted behavior through fear transformed into narrative. Scylla was no longer just a monster. She was instruction, embodied. And so, her shape, strange, fragmented, impossible, was exactly right, because it mirrored the experience of the narrow sea itself, never fully understood, never fully seen, but always felt, always remembered, waiting, patient, ready to take, not out of malice, but because that was its nature. Before Scylla was feared, before her name caused sailors to lower their voices, before her presence was felt as a tightening in the chest, there existed another version of her story, quieter, softer, and far more tragic, a version remembered not through warning, but through sorrow in these older tellings. Scylla was not born a monster. She was made into one, shaped not by hunger or cruelty, but by jealousy, betrayal, and the irreversible nature of transformation. In this telling, Scylla began as a sea nymph, a being tied to the gentle edges of the ocean rather than its violent depths. She belonged to clear waters, shaded coves, and quiet shores where waves lapped softly against stone. Her existence was not dramatic, it was unnoticed, and that unnoticed state was her protection. Nymphs were not rulers, not conquerors. They were expressions of place, embodiments of calm. And Scylla's early life was defined by stillness rather than danger. She moved through the water freely, not as something hunted, not as something feared, but as part of the environment itself. Her presence blended into the rhythm of tide and light, and for a time, she existed beyond consequence, untouched by the rivalries of gods, untouched by the ambitions of mortals. This innocence is important because it stands in sharp contrast to what followed. Scylla's tragedy was not that she became dangerous, but that she lost the freedom to be harmless. Her fate shifted the moment she was seen, not noticed, but desired. Attention from powerful beings was never neutral in the ancient world. It carried weight, imbalance, consequence. The sea god Glaucus saw Scylla and was consumed by longing, not because she sought him, but because desire often ignores consent. In seeking to possess her affection, he unknowingly set into motion the forces that would destroy her former self. Glaucus turned to Circe, a sorceress whose knowledge of transformation was both profound and dangerous. But Circe did not see Scylla as a distant figure. She saw her as a rival. Jealousy in myth is rarely quiet. It reshapes reality. And Circe's response was not confrontation, but alteration. She chose not to remove Scylla, but to change her permanently. The act itself was deceptively simple, poison mixed into water, water that Scylla trusted, water that had always been her refuge. This detail matters deeply. Because the sea did not attack Scylla, it betrayed her. When Scylla returned to bathe, to exist as she always had, transformation began, not instantly, but inevitably. Her body responded violently, pain spreading where calm once lived, confusion overwhelming familiarity. And the sea that once carried her gently now became the medium of her suffering. Transformation in ancient myth is never clean. It is not a change of costume. It is loss, identity dissolving, memory clashing with new form. Scylla's transformation twisted her body into something unrecognizable, necks emerging where none should exist, mouths forming where silence once lived, hunger replacing harmony, and worst of all, awareness remained. She did not lose memory of what she had been. She was forced to live with it, trapped inside a body that no longer allowed gentleness. This is what makes Scylla's story different from many monsters. She was not born other, she became other. And this becoming was imposed, not chosen. Ancient audiences understood this distinction deeply. They recognized injustice even within myth. Scylla's violence was not celebrated. It was mourned. She was dangerous. Yes, but she was also wronged. And this duality gave her story emotional depth that endured for centuries. After her transformation, Scylla fled, not because she sought isolation, but because she no longer fit anywhere else. The gentle waters rejected her. The quiet shores could not contain her new form. And so she retreated to the narrow sea, a place already hostile, already feared, a place that mirrored her internal state. Constrained, restless, unforgiving, here she became bound not only physically, but symbolically. The sea that had betrayed her now confined her, and she could not leave. Her cave became both shelter and prison, carved into rock by relentless waves, echoing with sound she did not control. Scylla did not choose to guard the passage. She was trapped within it. Her hunger, her violence, her strikes at passing sailors, all were consequences of a transformation that removed choice. She did not hunt because she wished to. She hunted because her new body demanded it. This perspective reshapes how Scylla is understood. She is not merely a predator. She is a victim locked into a role she cannot escape. Every ship that passes near her cave becomes part of an ongoing tragedy, not a battle between good and evil, but a collision between survival and suffering. Sailors lose crew. Scylla loses herself again and again. Neither side truly wins. Ancient listeners would have recognized this pattern. Gods act, mortals suffer, and the natural world absorbs the consequences. Scylla's transformation reflects a recurring truth in myth. Power exercised without restraint leaves lasting scars, not just on individuals, but on the world itself. The narrow sea becomes dangerous not because Scylla chooses cruelty, but because cruelty was done to her. This understanding adds depth to her later depiction. When Scylla takes sailors, she does not pursue revenge, she does not seek justice. She simply exists as she has been made to exist, a force of loss created by another's envy. This lack of intent makes her actions feel colder, more tragic, because they cannot be reasoned with, cannot be stopped. Unlike heroes who face monsters to restore balance, Scylla cannot be redeemed through combat. No sword can return her former body. No victory can undo what was done. The ancient world understood this limitation. Some wrongs cannot be corrected, only endured. Scylla embodies this truth, a living consequence of irreversible action. Her story also reflects fear of transformation itself. The idea that one moment of exposure, one act of betrayal, can permanently alter identity. Scylla did not slowly become dangerous through choice. She crossed a boundary and could never return. This resonated deeply in cultures where fate was seen as fragile, where one decision could echo forever. Thus, Scylla's myth carries two parallel fears: the fear of external danger and the fear of losing oneself. The narrow sea threatens bodies. Scylla's origin threatens identity. Together they form a complete warning about trust, about power, about the permanence of change. Over time, as her story merged with maritime experience, the tragedy faded into terror. Sailors no longer spoke of the nymph, only the monster, but the older layers remained, embedded beneath the surface, giving Scylla a weight that simple beasts never carried. She was feared, yes, but she was also remembered, and remembrance implies recognition of suffering. In this way, Scylla stands apart from other mythical threats. She is not chaos unleashed, she is order broken. A reminder that some dangers are born not from nature, but from interference with it, and once created, they cannot be undone, only contained, endured, and passed on through story. And so, when sailors whispered her name, they spoke not only of teeth and loss, but of a deeper unease, the knowledge that the sea does not forget, that transformation leaves permanent marks, and that sometimes the most terrifying monsters were once something gentle, before the world made them otherwise. After her transformation, after the loss of her former body and former freedom, Scylla did not wander the seas in search of meaning or revenge. She did not roam like other monsters of legend. Instead, she became fixed, anchored, bound to a single place where stone and water met in permanent tension. This immobility defined her as surely as her many jaws, and it is here, in her stillness, that Scylla became something more than a creature. She became a condition of the world itself. The rock to which Scylla was bound was not merely a location. It was a boundary, a vertical wall rising sharply from the sea, jagged, shadowed, and carved endlessly by waves that never tired, caves formed within its face, deep hollows where sound gathered and distorted. These spaces became Scylla's domain, not because she chose them, but because there was nowhere else she could exist. Her altered body could not move freely through open water. Her many necks tangled, her weight resisted currents. And so, she remained, half hidden, half exposed, suspended between sea and stone. This binding was not a punishment imposed later. It was the final consequence of her transformation. The sea that once carried her gently now constrained her movements. The rock that rose beside her became both anchor and cave. Scylla's world narrowed as the sea narrowed for sailors. And in this mirroring, her fate became inseparable from the geography itself. She did not guard the passage intentionally, she embodied it. For sailors, this immobility was terrifying. A roaming danger can be avoided, predicted, tracked, but a fixed danger must be faced. Every ship that entered the narrow sea knew exactly where Scylla waited, and yet knowing did not grant safety. Her position was constant, but her reach was not. Her many heads extended outward unpredictably, and proximity alone determined fate, not intent, not skill, not courage. Scylla's waiting became her defining characteristic. She did not rush toward ships. She did not announce herself. She did not test defenses. She remained motionless, sometimes unseen, sometimes mistaken for rock or shadow, and this stillness created false comfort. Sailors mistook silence for safety, calm for permission, until the moment loss occurred, sudden, precise, irreversible. In myth, waiting is often more frightening than pursuit. Pursuit allows reaction, waiting denies it. Scylla's stillness denied sailors the illusion of control. There was nothing to fight, nothing to flee, only a space that could not be crossed without consequence. She was the embodiment of unavoidable proximity, the danger that exists simply because one must pass near it. Her cave, often described as dark and echoing, functioned as an extension of her presence. Ships passing too close heard sounds that seemed to come from within the stone itself, water dripping, waves striking hidden surfaces, wind funneling through narrow openings, all of it amplified and distorted. Sailors could not distinguish between natural sound and movement, between echo and intention. The environment itself collaborated in fear, making Scylla's presence feel larger than her physical form. This collaboration between monster and landscape is essential. Scylla alone did not create the terror of the narrow sea, nor did the rocks alone. Together, they formed a system, a living hazard, where geography and myth reinforced one another. Sailors did not fear Scylla in open water. They feared her only here, because only here did she make sense. Only here was she inevitable. Her immobility also changed how she was remembered. Stories of wandering beasts grow exaggerated over distance, but stories of fixed dangers remain precise. Sailors described Scylla's location with care: landmarks, distances, angles of approach. Instructions were passed down: steer closer to the other side, do not linger, do not look, do not hesitate. Scylla became part of navigational knowledge, a feature to be accounted for, like reefs, shoals, or currents, but with agency, with memory. Unlike monsters slain by heroes, Scylla persisted, generation after generation, unchained. Ships changed, tools improved, knowledge grew, but Scylla remained. And this permanence elevated her beyond ordinary myth. She was not a challenge to be overcome once. She was a reality to be managed forever. This is why she could not be killed in story. Her death would imply that the danger itself could be removed. An experience taught otherwise. For ancient audiences, this permanence resonated deeply. Life was filled with fixed dangers: famine, disease, natural disaster, threats that could be mitigated but not eliminated. Scylla fit into this worldview perfectly. She was not an anomaly, she was representative. A reminder that some forces are woven into the structure of existence, not placed there by malice, but by circumstance. Scylla's hunger, often emphasized in later retellings, was not portrayed as pleasure, it was necessity. Her transformed body demanded sustenance, and ships provided it, not by design, but by proximity. She did not choose who passed, the sea did, and she responded mechanically. This lack of choice stripped her of moral agency, reinforcing her role as condition rather than character. In this way, Scylla became closer to a natural phenomenon than a villain, like a cliff collapse or a sudden current. Deadly, yes, but not personal. Sailors did not curse her name in anger, they spoke it in warning. Anger implies betrayal. Scylla offered none. Her danger was known, acknowledged, and accepted. Her binding to the rock also meant isolation. She did not interact with gods or mortals beyond fleeting moments of violence. She did not speak, did not negotiate, did not respond to prayer. This silence amplified fear. Communication implies possibility. Silence implies finality. Scylla did not answer because the sea does not answer. It only acts. This isolation transformed her cave into a symbolic threshold, a place where sound entered but meaning did not return. Sailors heard echoes, but no explanation, just as they experienced loss, but no reason. Scylla's lair became a physical manifestation of unanswered questions. Why here? Why now? Why them? Questions the sea never resolves. Over time, Scylla's immobility allowed her to merge fully with the passage itself. She was no longer imagined as something separate from the rock. She was the rock made alive, the danger given form. Sailors did not speak of going past Scylla. They spoke of passing Scylla's rock. Place and creature fused into one concept, inseparable. reinforcing the idea that the danger could not be outrun, only passed with care. This fusion ensured Scylla's endurance in memory. Places persist longer than creatures. As long as the narrow sea existed, Scylla would exist, her myth anchored to geography, resistant to fading. Even as belief in gods waned, the rock remained, the currents remained, and so did the story. In this binding, Scylla achieved a strange form of immortality, not through worship, not through conquest, but through permanence. She could not leave, but she could not be forgotten. Every ship that passed renewed her relevance. Every near miss reinforced her warning. Every loss deepened her presence. Thus, Scylla bound to the rock became a lesson carved into stone about limits, about acceptance, about the dangers that define paths rather than block them. She did not stop passage, she shaped it, forcing sailors to choose, to steer, to sacrifice, and to continue changed. And in this role, Scylla became eternal, not because she was powerful, but because the world required something like her to explain its indifference. As long as narrow passages exist, as long as movement requires risk, as long as survival demands loss, there will always be a Scylla waiting, bound, patient, part of the landscape itself. The terror of the narrow sea did not come from Scylla alone. Her power was magnified by what waited across the passage, another force, different in nature, but equal in consequence. Where Scylla was fixed and selective, Charybdis was vast and consuming, a living absence that erased ships entirely. Between these two dangers lay a corridor with no true safety, only calculation, only choice. And it was this forced decision that haunted sailors long after they reached land. Ancient people understood the sea through balance. Opposing forces held in tension, calm and storm, depth and surface. And in the narrow passage, this balance took on a cruel clarity, drift too far from one side, and the sea opened into violent motion, a whirlpool that drew water downward with relentless pull, consuming hulls, cargo, and crew without discrimination. Nothing returned from Charybdis, no survivors, no wreckage, only absence. A clean erasure that left no memory behind. Scylla offered something different, she took, but she left something behind, she reduced rather than erased. And this distinction mattered deeply to sailors. To lose everything was annihilation. To lose a few was survival, painful, altered, but possible, and so, when faced with the narrow sea, captains steered deliberately, not toward safety, but toward the lesser loss. This decision was not made lightly. It was weighed in silence, often before departure, often long before the rocks came into view. The phrase that would later emerge, to be caught between Scylla and Charybdis, did not originate as metaphor. It was lived experience, a navigation problem that demanded acceptance rather than bravery. Sailors knew that no amount of skill could guarantee passage without cost. The only control they possessed lay in choosing the nature of that cost: total loss or partial survival. This choice altered how sailors understood responsibility. Captains bore the weight of decision, not because they could prevent harm, but because they could determine its scale. This burden was heavy. It lingered long after voyages ended, memories of faces chosen by chance, of spaces left empty on deck. The narrow sea demanded leadership that accepted guilt as part of survival. Scylla's role in this dynamic was precise. She represented the cost that could be counted: 6 sailors, sometimes fewer, sometimes more, but never all. Charybdis represented the unknown, the absolute, the end of story, and humans have always preferred known suffering to total uncertainty. Scylla's predictability made her paradoxically less terrifying, not because she was kind, but because she was comprehensible. This forced preference reveals something profound about the human relationship with danger. People do not always seek safety, they seek continuity, the ability to move forward, even diminished. Scylla allowed movement, Charybdis did not. And so, in the silent calculations made on rocking decks, Scylla became the chosen terror, the one that allowed the story to continue. Ancient myths rarely frame this choice as moral. There is no judgment placed on captains who steer towards Scylla, no condemnation for allowing some to be lost. The sea itself demands this logic, and the myths reflect acceptance rather than critique. This is not a world where all outcomes can be just, only endured. Charybdis, though less anthropomorphized than Scylla, served an equally important role. She represented nature's capacity for complete erasure. Storms destroy, predators kill. But whirlpools erase. They leave no bodies, no closure, no memory. Scylla's violence was visible. Her victims were taken from sight. Charybdis removed evidence altogether. And in human psychology, absence without explanation is more terrifying than witnessed loss. Thus, the choice between Scylla and Charybdis became a choice between two kinds of fear: immediate pain or total disappearance. And time after time, humans chose pain. This pattern echoes beyond the sea, into every domain where difficult decisions must be made: sacrifice now or risk everything later. The narrow sea forced sailors to confront the limits of agency. Free will existed, but within boundaries, choice mattered, but outcomes were constrained. This tension shaped ancient philosophy, the understanding that fate is not absolute, nor is freedom complete. Scylla and Charybdis together embodied this balance. Neither could be avoided entirely, but how one was faced mattered. Stories of the passage often emphasized preparation rather than heroism, warnings given, routes memorized, timing calculated, offerings made, all acknowledging that while the danger could not be removed, respect could reduce its severity. Scylla rewarded neither arrogance nor cowardice, only attention, and Charybdis punished hesitation as readily as recklessness. The sea between them felt alive with pressure. Currents tugged in opposing directions, forcing constant correction. The ship itself became a negotiation, wood straining against water, oars resisting pull, sailors sweating in silence, aware that a moment's lapse could tip balance irreversibly. This physical struggle reinforced the psychological one. The body understood what the mind already knew. There was no safe center. When poets later wrote of heroes navigating this passage, they did not frame success as triumph. Survival itself was victory enough to emerge with losses acknowledged, with grief accepted, and with the journey continuing. This framing shaped cultural values: endurance over conquest, wisdom over force. Scylla's continued presence in these stories ensured that loss was never abstract. It had teeth, voices, faces. Charybdis remained faceless, impersonal, a void. Together they formed a complete vision of danger, one personal, one absolute, and humans learned to navigate between them, not by eliminating fear, but by choosing how to carry it. This is why Scylla could never be removed from the story. Without her, the choice would disappear, and with it, the lesson. The narrow sea was not about avoiding danger. It was about confronting reality, accepting that some paths forward demand sacrifice, and that leadership often means deciding who pays that price, not because it is right, but because it is necessary. Even generations later, long after ships grew stronger and navigation improved, the metaphor endured. Because the structure of the choice remained relevant, people recognized Scylla and Charybdis in every dilemma where no option was clean, where action itself caused harm. And in this way, the ancient sea passage became a map of human decision-making. Thus, Scylla and Charybdis together define the narrow sea not merely as a place, but as a principle. The principle that life offers corridors where safety does not exist, only degrees of loss, and that survival often depends on the courage to choose knowingly, rather than hope blindly. And so, every time a ship entered that passage, every time a captain adjusted course, the ancient lesson was repeated, quietly, without ceremony. The sea does not care which choice is made. It only responds, and Scylla waits, not as an enemy, but as the cost of continuing forward, when all other paths lead to nothing at all. When Odysseus approached the narrow sea, he did not arrive as an innocent sailor, nor as a reckless hero seeking glory. He arrived carrying memory, loss, and the weight of years spent learning that survival rarely comes without cost. His journey had already taught him that monsters were not always meant to be defeated. Some existed simply to be endured. And it was with this understanding that he listened carefully when warned about what waited ahead. The warnings were precise, unsettling in their certainty. No strength could overcome Scylla. No weapon could drive her back. Resistance would only increase loss. Odysseus was told not to fight, not to challenge, but to pass, and to accept what would be taken. This instruction ran counter to heroic instinct. Yet Odysseus understood something deeper. The narrow sea was not a battlefield. It was a passage, and passages do not yield to force. As his ship neared the rocks, the sea offered no sign of threat. The water remained calm, the wind steady, the cliffs silent. This absence of warning was itself a warning. Odysseus had learned to distrust calm more than chaos. Storms announced themselves. But this place concealed danger behind stillness. And so he prepared not for combat, but for endurance. He did not tell his crew everything, not out of cruelty, but necessity. Fear spreads quickly, and panic in the narrow sea could be fatal. Instead, he armed himself, not with hope, but with acceptance, knowing that leadership sometimes means carrying knowledge alone, bearing guilt so others may continue moving. As the ship entered the passage, sound seemed to change. Oars dipped more slowly, the hull creaked softly, and the cliffs pressed closer. The sea narrowed, and time itself appeared to slow, every movement deliberate, every breath measured. The crew sensed the weight of the place even without knowing its name, instinctively quiet, aware that attention mattered more than courage here. Then, without warning, Scylla struck, not with spectacle, not with roar or splash, but with precision. 6 sailors were lifted from the deck, their bodies rising abruptly into the air, their cries sharp, brief, and final. There was no struggle, no chance for intervention. They were gone before understanding could form, and silence returned just as suddenly. Odysseus heard their voices and did not turn back. This moment defines him more than any victory, not because he was heartless, but because he understood reality. Turning back would not save them. Fighting would only increase loss. Leadership here required forward motion, even when the cost was unbearable. Scylla did not pursue. She did not follow the ship beyond her reach. Once the toll was taken, the passage released them. The sea widened again, the cliffs receded, and danger dissolved into memory, leaving behind absence, and the echo of voices that would follow Odysseus long after land returned. This encounter is often misunderstood, framed as hero versus monster, but the ancient audience recognized its true nature. Odysseus did not defeat Scylla, he survived her. And survival was the highest form of success the narrow sea allowed. His strength lay not in combat, but in restraint, in accepting loss without surrendering to despair. The number of sailors taken mattered. 6. Accountable loss, not random, not total, reinforcing Scylla's role as selective danger. Charybdis would have erased them all. Scylla reduced them. This distinction shaped how the event was remembered. Grief was personal, specific. Each absence felt, each name remembered. And because survivors remained, memory endured. Odysseus carried this memory forward, not as triumph, but as burden. The cries of his crew were not forgotten. They were part of the price of continuation, and this burden humanized him, separating him from heroes who emerged unscarred. Odysseus survived by choosing loss knowingly, and that choice changed him. Scylla's appearance in the Odyssey cemented her role in cultural memory. She was not an obstacle to be overcome, but a fixed reality, a test of judgment rather than strength. This framing influenced generations of storytellers, reinforcing the idea that wisdom lies in recognizing when force is useless and restraint is survival. Importantly, Scylla remains unchanged by the encounter. She is not wounded, not angered, not altered. Odysseus passes, but she remains, waiting for the next ship. This constancy reinforces her symbolic role. Heroes may come and go, but some dangers persist regardless of individual journeys. The silence after the attack is as significant as the attack itself. There is no aftermath scene, no mourning ritual within the passage. Grief is postponed, because the sea demands focus until safety returns. This delay mirrors real maritime experience. Loss often cannot be processed until danger has passed. Survival comes first, emotion later. In this way, the Odyssey captures the psychological truth of such encounters. The numbness that follows sudden loss, the mechanical continuation of action, the mind compartmentalizing grief until it can be borne. Scylla's strike does not end the journey, it reshapes it, leaving survivors altered, quieter, more aware of fragility. The episode also reinforces Scylla's lack of malice. She does not target Odysseus personally. She does not recognize him. She responds to proximity alone. Her action is impersonal, consistent, predictable in its unpredictability. She is not an antagonist with motive. She is a force encountered and passed. For ancient listeners, this distinction mattered. It aligned Scylla with the sea itself, dangerous, indifferent, and beyond moral negotiation. One does not appeal to the sea, one adapts to it. Odysseus adapts, and in doing so, he survives. The story of passing Scylla endured because it resonated beyond the sea. It spoke to every situation where leadership requires choosing between harms. where transparency may cause panic, where silence carries guilt, and where moving forward means leaving part of oneself behind. Odysseus became a model not of victory, but of endurance under impossible conditions. Scylla's presence in this tale ensured that the narrow sea would never be remembered as merely geography. It became a moral landscape, a place where character is revealed not through action, but through acceptance. Odysseus does not boast of passing Scylla, he endures it, and that endurance defines him. Long after the ship clears the rocks, long after the sea widens, Scylla remains behind, unchanged, waiting, her role fulfilled, her presence reaffirmed. And the lesson renewed: some dangers cannot be defeated, only passed with eyes open, hands steady, and heart prepared for loss. And so, the story closes not with victory, but continuation. Odysseus sails on, diminished, but alive, and Scylla remains, bound to stone, patient. A reminder etched into myth that survival is sometimes the quiet act of moving forward, even when something precious has been taken and cannot be recovered. Among all the dangers imagined by the ancient world, Scylla stands apart, not because she was more violent, but because she lacked intent. She did not scheme, she did not judge, she did not punish pride or reward humility. She simply existed. And in that existence, she acted. This absence of malice unsettled sailors more deeply than rage ever could, because rage can be reasoned with, predicted, appeased. Indifference cannot. Scylla did not hate the sailors she took. She did not even recognize them as individuals. To her, they were movement, proximity, presence. Her many heads responded to closeness as waves respond to wind mechanically, without pause, without reflection. This quality placed her closer to the sea itself than to the monsters of heroic legend. She was not a villain, she was a process. Ancient stories rarely describe Scylla speaking, and this silence was intentional. Speech implies negotiation, explanation, motive. Scylla offered none. Sailors cried out, prayed, cursed, and received no response, not because she was cruel, but because the sea does not answer. And Scylla was the sea given form at its most constrained and dangerous. This lack of malice reframed fear. Sailors did not imagine Scylla watching them with pleasure or savoring their panic. Instead, they imagined her waiting, unmoving, responding only when distance collapsed. This made her more terrifying, because it removed the illusion that good behavior could ensure safety. No promise, no offering, no virtue guaranteed passage. In many myths, monsters exist to test heroes, to reveal character through combat. Scylla offered no such opportunity. There was nothing to prove, no victory to claim, only survival, and survival did not require courage so much as acceptance. This inverted heroic values, placing restraint above bravery, wisdom above strength. Ancient audiences understood this inversion intuitively. The sea was not a place where heroics mattered. Storms did not yield to confidence. Currents did not respond to defiance. Scylla reflected this truth. She punished neither arrogance nor fear. She responded to physics, to proximity, to inevitability. Her hunger, often emphasized in later retellings, was not framed as desire, but necessity. Her transformed body demanded sustenance, and ships provided it, not because she sought them, but because they passed within reach. This hunger stripped her of moral agency. She did not choose victims, circumstance did. This understanding softened hatred. Sailors feared Scylla, but they did not curse her as evil. Instead, they respected her as one respects a cliff or a reef or a sudden drop in depth, dangers that exist without intention, but must be acknowledged, ignored at one's peril. The absence of malice also deepened tragedy, because it meant there was no villain to blame, no enemy to defeat. Loss could not be avenged, only absorbed. This emotional reality mirrors real maritime disasters, where the sea takes lives without explanation, leaving survivors searching for meaning where none exists. Scylla's neutrality placed responsibility squarely on humans if loss occurred. It was because a ship came too close, because a decision was made, because passage was attempted. This did not mean sailors were at fault, but it reinforced the understanding that engagement with danger carries inherent risk, regardless of intent. This perspective shaped how Scylla was spoken of. Warnings focused on distance, timing, steering, not on appeasement. There were no rituals to calm her. No offerings guaranteed safety, only knowledge, preparation, and acceptance. She could not be bargained with because she did not choose. In this way, Scylla became an early expression of natural law, a force that operates consistently, without moral dimension. Ancient people lacked the language of physics, but they understood the principle. Certain conditions produce certain outcomes, regardless of desire. Scylla embodied this principle in narrative form. Her lack of malice also explains why she was never pursued by heroes. Slaying Scylla would imply restoring justice. But justice was not violated. Nature had not erred. A hero cannot correct gravity, cannot punish the sea for drowning. Scylla existed beyond the reach of heroism, and thus remained untouched. Even gods rarely intervened. Scylla's origin involved divine action, but her continued existence did not prompt divine correction. Once transformed, she was allowed to remain a permanent consequence of imbalance. reflecting the ancient belief that some actions echo forever, altering the world in ways that cannot be undone. For listeners, this permanence carried warning, not just about the sea, but about power, jealousy, and unintended consequence. Circe's act did not simply harm Scylla, it reshaped an entire passage of the world, endangering countless lives. The absence of malice in Scylla highlighted the true source of tragedy, not the monster, but the act that created her. Over time, as stories were retold, this nuance often faded, fear overshadowed pity, yet the core remained. Scylla was never depicted as gleeful, never reveling in destruction. She was always waiting, acting, returning to stillness. Her neutrality preserved her connection to the sea's indifference. This indifference forced sailors to confront uncomfortable truth. The world does not care about intention, only about interaction. Step too close to danger, and consequence follows, regardless of goodness or skill. Scylla taught this lesson repeatedly, without variation, without exception. In human psychology, such lessons linger. They shape caution, humility, and respect for forces beyond control. Scylla's myth endured because it captured this reality perfectly. She was not evil, and that made her unavoidable. To fear a malicious enemy is to hope for defeat. To fear an indifferent force is to adapt. Scylla forced adaptation, not through threat, but through certainty. She would always be there, always act the same, and therefore could be accounted for, even if not avoided. This accounting shaped navigation, stories, and philosophy. Scylla became shorthand for inevitable loss, the cost that must sometimes be paid to continue, without hatred, without blame, only recognition. And so, in the end, Scylla's greatest terror lay not in her teeth, but in her silence, not in her violence, but in her indifference. She reminded all who passed that the sea does not judge, it simply responds, and that understanding this truth is the first step towards survival, not victory, but continuation. Beneath the shape of Scylla, beneath the teeth and the many heads, beneath the tragedy and the terror, there existed something older and quieter, a foundation of real danger that did not require imagination to be lethal. The ancient sea did not need monsters to be feared. It already possessed reefs that tore hulls apart, currents that dragged ships sideways without warning, winds that changed direction within moments, and waters so deep and dark that recovery was impossible. Scylla did not replace these dangers. She organized them, gave them coherence, and allowed the human mind to remember them clearly. The narrow sea was a convergence of hazards. Geography forced water into tight corridors, accelerating currents beneath the surface. Waves reflected unpredictably off opposing cliffs, creating confused seas that behaved differently from open water. A ship could appear stable one moment and be pulled violently off course. The next, ancient vessels, built of wood and rope, responded slowly, and even minor miscalculations could prove fatal. This environment rewarded constant attention and punished fatigue without mercy. Jagged rocks lay just beneath the surface, invisible in certain light, revealed only by subtle changes in wave pattern. Sailors learned to read these signs, but exhaustion dulled perception. Night erased visual cues entirely, and echoes from stone faces distorted sound, making it impossible to locate danger precisely. A shout might seem close, then distant, then everywhere at once, disorienting crews already strained by long voyages. Currents in the narrow passage did not simply flow forward. They moved laterally, pulling ships toward cliffs, especially when tides shifted. Oars fought resistance that could not be seen. Steering demanded constant correction, and the margin for error was small. A moment's inattention, a tired hand on the rudder, and the ship drifted into reach of stone, or worse, into the zone where waves rebounded chaotically, lifting and dropping the hull unevenly, throwing sailors from their footing. These conditions explain why loss in this passage often appeared selective. One sailor might be swept overboard while another stood untouched. One section of deck might become suddenly dangerous while another remained calm. Such randomness felt intentional, but it was the product of complex physical forces interacting in confined space. Forces the ancient world could not measure, only experience. Scylla's many heads mirrored this multiplicity of threat. Danger did not come from a single source. It came from many directions at once: waves, wind, current, rock, fatigue, fear. And the human mind combined these into a single image that could be remembered, warned against, and passed on. Myth served as a compression of experience, a way to store generations of hard-earned knowledge in a form that traveled easily. The echoes from caves played a powerful role in shaping belief. Sound in the narrow sea behaved unpredictably. Waves striking hollow spaces produced low, resonant tones. Wind whistled through narrow openings, and the resulting noise carried across water, changing pitch as ships moved. At night, these sounds took on a voice like quality, rising, falling, repeating. Sailors interpreted them through fear, and fear completed the image, turning noise into presence. Even the sudden disappearance of sailors had mundane explanations. Waves striking at the right angle could lift a person cleanly off deck. Currents could carry bodies beneath the hull instantly. Darkness prevented rescue, and heavy clothing dragged victims under. Yet to those who witnessed it, the loss felt like seizure, as though something had reached up deliberately. Scylla's grasp gave form to this experience, making sense of speed and finality. Importantly, the myth did not exaggerate danger beyond reality. If anything, it simplified it. The narrow sea was genuinely one of the most hazardous passages of the ancient world. Ships were lost there repeatedly, crews vanished, and survivors returned with consistent stories of unpredictability and loss. Myth arose not to inflate fear, but to explain consistency, why this place, again and again, demanded payment. Scylla's fixed location aligns with the fixed nature of these hazards. Reefs do not move, cliffs do not chase, currents shift but remain bound to geography. A roaming monster would not fit the lived experience. A stationary one would. Scylla's immobility anchored danger to place, ensuring that future sailors approached with caution rather than complacency. The idea that Scylla lived in a cave reflects real navigational advice. Avoid the cliffs. Avoid the hollows where sound deceives and water rebounds. Keep distance. Keep moving. Do not linger. Myth encoded instruction within story, far more effectively than abstract warning ever could. This encoding was essential in a world without maps, literacy, or standardized training. Stories traveled with sailors across languages, across generations. And Scylla became a portable warning, a name that carried with it an entire set of behaviors. Slow down, stay alert, expect loss. Do not fight the sea, pass carefully. Over time, as ships improved, some dangers lessened, hulls strengthened, navigation improved. Yet accidents still occurred, reinforcing belief. Technology reduced risk, but did not remove it, and so Scylla endured, adapting to new eras not because she was supernatural, but because the hazards she represented remained real. Even today, modern vessels transit narrow straits with caution. Currents are measured, traffic controlled. Yet collisions and groundings still occur. The sea's behavior remains complex, and human error remains inevitable. Scylla's lesson persists, not as belief in a monster, but as respect for constrained waters. Understanding the real dangers beneath the myth does not diminish Scylla, it deepens her significance. She was not a fantasy layered onto harmless water. She was a narrative response to genuine threat, a way for ancient minds to process risk, grief, and survival. Myth and reality are not opposites here. They are partners. Reality provided experience. Myth provided meaning. Together they formed a system of knowledge that kept people alive more often than not. Scylla was not created to scare children. She was created to warn sailors, and warnings that endure usually have truth at their core. This truth explains why Scylla remains compelling even in an age of science. We no longer believe in her teeth, but we recognize her function. She stands for places where conditions overwhelm intention, where knowledge reduces risk but cannot eliminate it, and where humility is the most reliable tool available. Thus, beneath the monster, beneath the tragedy, beneath the poetry, Scylla rests on stone, current, and echo, on physics experienced before it was named. She is the memory of danger preserved in story, the sea speaking through myth, reminding those who listen that some passages demand respect, because they always have and always will. Over time, as ships grew stronger, as navigation improved, and as belief in literal monsters slowly faded, Scylla did not disappear. Instead, she transformed. No longer feared only as a creature of rock and water, she became something quieter, more persistent, a symbol that traveled far beyond the narrow sea into language, philosophy, and the private decisions of everyday life. Her power shifted from physical danger to psychological truth, and in doing so, she became immortal. The phrase born from her presence, to be caught between Scylla and Charybdis, endured because it named an experience older than myth itself, the experience of facing choices where no option is clean, where every path carries harm, and where inaction is itself a decision. This phrase did not survive because of poetry alone. It survived because people recognized themselves in it. Again and again, across centuries, across cultures. Scylla came to represent the loss that must be accepted, not because it is deserved, but because it is unavoidable. She symbolized the price of movement, the cost of progress, the toll demanded by narrow passages in life where retreat is impossible, and waiting only increases danger. This interpretation resonated deeply in societies shaped by uncertainty, famine, war, disease, and the constant awareness that survival rarely comes without sacrifice. Unlike symbols of evil, Scylla did not represent moral failure. She did not stand for punishment or divine judgment. Instead, she represented reality itself, stripped of intention, indifferent to fairness, and unmoved by protest. This made her symbolically powerful because it shifted focus away from blame and toward response. What matters is not why Scylla exists, but how one passes her. In this symbolic form, Scylla taught that inevitability does not negate responsibility. The loss may be unavoidable, but the choice of how to face it remains. Captains still steer, leaders still decide, individuals still act, knowing harm will follow. This tension between inevitability and agency lies at the heart of human experience, and Scylla embodied it perfectly. Philosophers later echoed this lesson without naming her, speaking of tragic choice, of lesser evils, of decisions made under constraint. Scylla's presence can be felt in every argument that acknowledges limits, that accepts imperfect outcomes, that values survival over purity. She became the shadow behind realism, the reminder that ideals must sometimes yield to circumstance. In leadership, Scylla's lesson is especially sharp. Those in command are often forced to choose outcomes that harm some in order to protect others. This burden isolates leaders, much as Odysseus carried knowledge his crew could not bear. Scylla stands behind these moments, silent, watching, representing the cost leaders must live with long after the decision is made. In personal life, Scylla appears whenever change demands loss, leaving home, ending relationships, choosing one future over another. Something must be left behind, and the pain of that loss does not mean the choice was wrong. It means the passage was narrow. Scylla teaches that pain does not invalidate necessity. What makes Scylla's symbolism enduring is its emotional honesty. She does not promise growth through suffering. She does not frame loss as reward. She simply acknowledges that harm occurs, even when choices are wise, even when intentions are good. This acceptance feels stark, but it also feels true, and truth endures where comfort fades. Unlike symbols that inspire hope, Scylla inspires clarity. She removes illusion. She strips decision-making down to essentials: move forward, or be consumed entirely, accept limited loss, or risk total erasure. This clarity can be unsettling, but it is also grounding. It allows action when waiting would be worse. In this way, Scylla became a guide rather than a threat, not guiding toward safety, but toward realism, reminding those who face narrow passages that fear does not mean failure, and loss does not mean defeat. It means engagement with a world that does not bend easily to desire. Her symbolic transformation also explains why she remains relevant in modern storytelling. She appears in novels, films, psychology, and everyday speech, sometimes unnamed, but always present, whenever characters face irreversible choices. Whenever outcomes must be weighed rather than avoided, Scylla's shape may fade, but her function remains. This persistence reveals something fundamental about myth itself. Myths survive not because they describe the world accurately, but because they describe human experience accurately. Scylla no longer needs to live in a cave. She lives in decision-making, in the quiet moments before action, when options narrow and consequences become real. In accepting Scylla as inevitable, ancient audiences did not surrender to despair. They adapted. They learned to move carefully, to prepare emotionally, and to mourn without paralysis. This adaptation is wisdom, not resignation. Scylla teaches that acknowledging limits is the first step toward navigating them. Thus, her legacy is not fear, but recognition that some losses are not punishments, but tolls, and that paying them consciously is sometimes the only way to continue. Scylla stands not as a warning to turn back, but as a reminder to choose deliberately, with eyes open and heart prepared. As long as humans face constrained paths, irreversible decisions, and imperfect options, Scylla will remain present, not as a monster in the sea, but as a symbol within the mind, quiet, patient, unavoidable, waiting at the narrow places where life demands courage not of conquest, but of acceptance. Long after the first sailors whispered warnings, long after oars were replaced by sails and sails by engines, the sea remained unchanged in its memory. Water does not forget the shape of stone, currents do not forget the paths they carve, and narrow passages do not forget the losses that define them. Even as belief in monsters faded, the behaviors that gave rise to Scylla endured, embedded not in myth, but in motion. Ships continued to pass through the same constrained waters, guided now by charts, instruments, and satellites. Yet the sea still tightened there, currents still pulled sideways, winds still shifted suddenly, and the margin for error remained small. Modern technology reduced uncertainty, but it did not erase complexity. Accidents still occurred, vessels still grounded, lives were still lost, and each incident echoed an ancient truth. Some places demand respect regardless of era. The sea remembers not in stories, but in repetition. The same mistakes recur, the same misjudgments surface, the same confidence precedes loss. This repetition is what once gave rise to myth, and it continues to shape human behavior today. When mariners slow instinctively in certain waters, when caution replaces speed, they are responding to memory older than language. Scylla's endurance lies here, not in belief, but in behavior. Sailors may no longer imagine teeth rising from caves, but they still adjust course, still keep distance from rock faces, still treat narrow passages with heightened awareness. The myth dissolved, the lesson remained. This is how true stories survive, by shaping action rather than demanding faith. Even the silence of the sea carries memory. Certain stretches feel different, not because danger is visible, but because history lingers. Wrecks rest on the seabed, currents swirl around them, altering flow subtly, influencing future movement. The past shapes the present physically, not symbolically, and the sea records every interaction without judgment. This physical memory mirrors human memory. Survivors carry stories forward, sometimes altered, sometimes simplified, but always marked by emotion. Fear becomes caution, loss becomes instruction, and the narrow sea remains alive in collective awareness, not as a place of monsters, but as a place where attention matters. Scylla's cave, whether real or imagined, represents the idea that the sea contains spaces where sound, sight, and certainty fail. Modern sonar pierces darkness, Yet blind spots remain. Technology extends perception, but never completes it. Uncertainty persists, and where uncertainty persists, respect follows. The sea remembers not only loss, but adaptation, routes adjusted, rules written, traffic controlled. These changes reflect learning, the same learning once encoded in myth, today expressed through regulation. Both serve the same purpose, survival. In this way, Scylla becomes a bridge between ancient and modern understanding, a reminder that knowledge evolves, but danger does not vanish. It changes form, shifts expression, yet remains rooted in geography, physics, and human limitation. When storms pass and calm returns, the sea offers no apology. It does not acknowledge what it has taken. This indifference unsettles, but it is honest, and honesty endures. Scylla embodied this honesty, loss without explanation, consequence without intent, a reality that cannot be reasoned away. Even now, those who work at sea speak of bad water, tight passages, unforgiving stretches, language softened, but meaning intact. Scylla lives in these phrases, stripped of myth, preserved in caution. The sea remembers because it repeats, and humans remember because repetition leaves marks, scars on wood, gaps in crews, names spoken quietly after journeys end. Scylla's memory is written not in belief, but in absence, the empty spaces left behind. Thus, while myths fade, the sea continues its work, shaping movement, demanding attention, rewarding humility, and punishing neglect. Scylla no longer needs to be seen, she is felt. Every time a ship slows, every time a captain chooses caution, every time a narrow passage tightens the breath. And so, the sea remembers, not Scylla herself, but what she represented, that some dangers are permanent, some lessons eternal, and that survival has always depended on listening, not to stories alone, but to the water beneath them. In the end, Scylla does not fade with the monsters of older ages. She does not vanish when belief changes, or when science replaces myth, because Scylla was never sustained by belief alone. She was sustained by experience, by repetition, by the quiet recognition that some dangers are woven into the structure of the world, and that knowing this does not remove fear, but teaches how to live with it. Her legacy is quiet, not marked by temples, not preserved by worship, but carried in language, behavior, and instinct. When people speak of difficult choices, of narrow paths, of losses that must be accepted to continue forward, Scylla is present, unnamed, but unmistakable. She exists wherever options shrink, and consequence becomes unavoidable. Scylla's endurance lies in her restraint. She does not chase humanity through time. She waits patiently, as she always has, appearing only when paths narrow, when movement requires sacrifice, and when turning back is no longer possible. She does not intrude into moments of abundance. She emerges only at thresholds, at crossings, at points of decision where continuation demands cost. This makes her legacy deeply human, because human life is filled with such passages, moments where growth requires leaving something behind, where protection of one thing necessitates loss of another, where survival itself feels like betrayal of what was. Scylla gives shape to this experience, not to glorify it, but to acknowledge it honestly. Unlike myths that promise redemption, Scylla offers no comfort. She does not suggest that loss will be repaid, or that suffering guarantees meaning. She simply affirms that loss occurs, even when choices are wise, even when intentions are good. This stark clarity is what gives her power. She does not deceive, and so she endures. Her story teaches that acceptance is not weakness, it is adaptation. Sailors who survived Scylla did not do so by denying danger, but by recognizing it, preparing for it, and continuing despite it. This lesson extends far beyond the sea, into every domain where resilience matters more than triumph. Scylla's quiet legacy is also a warning about transformation. Her origin reminds us that irreversible change can arise from careless action, from power exercised without foresight, and that consequences may outlast intention, reshaping the world in ways no one can fully undo. She stands as a monument to permanence, not of stone, but of consequence. Yet, even in this permanence, there is no cruelty, only continuity. The world does not pause to grieve, nor does it accelerate to punish. It moves, as it always has. Scylla waits, not to condemn, but to exist, a reminder that the world is not obligated to align with human desire, only to respond to human action. In modern times, Scylla's teeth have dulled into metaphor, her cave into memory, her rock into geography, but her function remains intact. She still marks the places where caution replaces confidence, where humility matters more than ambition, and where survival depends on acknowledging limits. She reminds us that not every story ends in victory. Some end in continuation, quieter, altered, diminished, but alive, and that continuation itself can be enough. Scylla does not demand admiration, she demands awareness. When the sea widens, when danger recedes, Scylla does not follow, she remains behind, part of the passage, part of the memory, waiting for the next crossing, the next decision, the next moment when reality narrows and choice becomes heavy. This is why her name persists, not shouted, not celebrated, but remembered. Scylla is spoken when honesty is required, when illusion must fall away, and when the cost of moving forward must be faced without disguise. And so her legacy endures, not as a monster lurking in water, but as a truth residing in human experience, that some dangers cannot be removed, some losses cannot be avoided, and some paths demand courage not of battle, but of acceptance. Scylla waits quietly, eternally, at the narrow places of the world, not to stop passage, but to remind those who pass that survival has always required respect, awareness, and the strength to continue, even when something precious has been left behind, forever.